Hey everybody, it's Scott and welcome to this week's episode of Strength and Health TV. Today the topic is going to be tone, getting toned. It's probably one of the most popular things that I hear whenever I do a fitness consultation. When I ask somebody what their goals are with their fitness training program, 9 times out of 10 it's got something to do with getting toned up. And I think the term tone has become very generalized and very generic for the way that it's used in the fitness industry nowadays. Typically, I think everybody knows what it means when somebody says, I want to get toned. Typically, they mean they want to lean up, they want to tone up their muscles so that you have more muscle definition. And oftentimes, the way that people go about doing that is the worst way to go about doing that, and that is to typically do the really lightweight, really high rep, kind of pump and burn type sets, thinking that that stiffness that they get in the muscle is what muscle tone is. And that's not the case, because if you've ever had the pump, you know that you feel tight for about maybe 15-20 minutes. Then after you're done working out and all the fluid gets out of the muscles, you kind of smooth back out, the muscle softens back up. So people think that by doing a bunch of high reps and kind of pumping up the muscles is going to bring this lasting muscle tone, because they like that kind of tight feeling that they get, or that flexed feeling that they get, and that's really just a byproduct of energy exhaustion. So there is a way to get toned, but first we need to really talk about what getting toned really is, and what tone really is. And I was kind of inspired to do this topic today by a conversation or a post that I saw on Facebook from my teammate Arvid Beck. Arvid's a amazing bodybuilder from Germany. He's part of Team Plant Built. I've followed him on social media for a little while now and was pretty psyched to be able to get to meet him this year at our event down in Austin, Texas. And Arvid's an awesome bodybuilder, great levels of conditioning, great shape, and does it all totally vegan, totally plant-based. So those of you that say you can't get jacked eating plants, it's a bunch of BS, because Arvid and everybody else on our team has totally disproven it. But anyway, so Arvid talked about how one of his goals right now, he's kind of shifting gears in his training, and he's going to be focused a little bit more on heavy weights and focusing more on strength training and hitting some PRs in that department. And I just made the comment to him about how, that's the way to get real tone, and I thought it was awesome that he was doing that, because if you look, I immediately thought back to some of the bodybuilders that I knew who trained really, really heavy, who had amazing physiques. You had people like Franco Columbu, who inspired Arnold to take up heavier weightlifting, particularly in his off season from competition. Franco was I believe he was a strongest man competitor as well as a powerlifting competitor, and his physique was incredibly dense as a result of his heavy lifting. I remember hearing Lee Labrada talking about the importance of training heavy, particularly in the off season, for bodybuilders to develop muscular density. Look at Dorian Yates, Ronnie Coleman, some of the more modern day bodybuilders who were notorious for training with very, very heavy weights. They had incredibly dense physiques that really stood out, from the rest of the guys on stage. I don't really follow professional bodybuilding much nowadays, so I really don't know, who at the higher levels is training this way now. But there were always people that really kind of jumped out at me when I was interested in bodybuilding that had amazing physiques, and they were also the ones that coincidentally always trained with very heavy weights. Many people that I follow in the industry, Charles Poliquin being one of them, who's probably the biggest mentor that I've ever had. There are many people who I've drawn inspiration from as I've gotten into the industry and started training people and kind of learning the ropes. But Charles was definitely one of my earliest influences, and I've always appreciated the work that he's put out. And he constantly talks about the importance of training with near maximal weights, at least some of the time. And probably one of my favorite books that I ever read that talks about this topic is by Pavel Tsatsouline. It's not his kettlebell book. It's Power to the People, the original Power to the People book. That was the first book I ever bought of his. I bought it from him at the Arnold Classic back in like 2000 or 2001 now, I think. So it's been a while ago. But the information's fantastic because he writes in a way that anybody can understand it, and he talks a lot about these scientific principles, and he presents them in a way that anybody can understand what the concepts are behind them. And in Power to the People, Pavel talks about what tone is, and this is the best description I've ever heard of it, and he basically describes it as residual tension in a relaxed muscle. All right, so if you go back and you think about the idea of just doing high reps with light weights and just getting that pump, you don't maintain that kind of tense feeling after your workout because you're just pumping a bunch of fluid into the muscles getting really tight and exhausted from work as it's being depleted of its ATP, the adenosine triphosphate, which is basically muscle energy, for lack of a better term. So as that muscle's getting exhausted, it's kind of locking up. And the way Pavel describes it in the book is it's like rigor mortis is setting in because it's the same thing that happens to a body after you die. So by doing all this high rep, pump and burn training, the muscle's getting really, really tight as it's being exhausted, but then as the muscle recovers, it loosens back up and you don't have that tense feeling in the muscle anymore, which is, I guess, why people walk around with that imaginary lat syndrome where they're always trying to flex to show off their muscles when they're buying apples at the grocery store, I guess. So what real muscle tone is, again, as Pavel describes it in his book, Power to the People, residual tension in a relaxed muscle. Now, that is the result, it's a byproduct of the nervous system being more alert, all right? So what it is, it's a partial contraction of muscles even after you're done training. So if it's the result of neurological activity, not energy depletion, how do we accomplish that through training? Well, you have to train in such a manner that stimulates the nervous system, and doing light weight for high reps has nothing to do with stimulating the nervous system. When you train with very heavy weights, and I would say weights in the 80 to 85% of a 1 repetition max or higher, now you're affecting the nervous system. And this is why you see so many weightlifters and powerlifters in the lighter weight class sports that often have amazing physiques because they have to take advantage of every pound. In the lighter weight classes, they can't afford to have a lot of extra body fat like some of the super heavy weightlifters can. So if we just kind of recap there, again, tone being residual tension in a relaxed muscle, which is a byproduct of the nervous system being more alert. So it's basically a partial contraction in the muscles post-training. So this can be accomplished without having to walk around, like you got a board stuck up your ass, flaring those lats and walking really tense and really tight all day, again, to show off your amazing physique. If you train in such a manner that most powerlifters and weightlifters do, which is predominantly with lower reps and heavier weights, you can take advantage of those same benefits. So even if you're not a competitive weightlifter or a competitive powerlifter or a strongman or somebody who competes in a strength sport, it's a really good idea to focus a lot of your training, if this is the type of look that you're seeking, a lot of your training on heavy weights and lower reps. The other thing that you have to factor into is body composition. Again, I mentioned it's typically the weightlifters and the powerlifters in the lighter, like the middleweight classes, even up into the light heavyweight classes, that typically have the better physiques, because once you start getting up into the heavyweights and the super heavies, especially in the super heavyweight division where there's no cap on the weight, the amount that you have to weigh, people will often be extremely big and they'll put on a lot of weight even if it is fat just to take advantage of improved leverages, and super heavyweights generally lift the most. So it's powerlifting, weightlifting is all about how much weight you lift, not how you look. So in the unrestricted weight classes, they don't need to maintain their body weight, so they can typically get a little bit heavier and look a little bit more out of shape, I guess is kind of a generalized term, but typically they've got a tremendous amount of muscle. It's just covered up under excessive fat, which lifters in the lighter classes like the 148s, the 165s, the 181s, they can't get away with all that extra fat. They need to max out their body weight for their weight class. So you're typically going to see much leaner, harder physiques. Now, when you think about that, if those lifters are trying to maintain a certain body weight, they're not going to spend a lot of their time trying to build extra muscle because it may move them up a weight class. And if that's not the goal, they can't afford to carry around all that extra muscle. So if you've got a lifter in the 165s who, maybe walks around 4 to 6 pounds outside of that weight class, maybe they're walking around weighing about 170 to 172 or so, they're going to need to be able to cut weight very easily so that they can lift as a 165. So they're not going to be able to let their body weight get out of control and make some ridiculous big cut, which I've got my own opinions on, and I think some of these cuts that people make nowadays is absolutely ridiculous. But typically somebody who doesn't have a day or two prior to competition to weigh in is going to have to maintain much closer to their competitive body weight. So if you're 165 and you've got to weigh in, say the day of, or less than 12 hours before, you're probably not going to be walking around at 180, 85, 190 pounds. You're probably going to be walking around maybe 4 to 6 pounds over your weight class, which would simply just be an easy water depletion. So again, these lifters have to maximize every single pound in their weight class. And if that's the case, it's much better to be predominantly muscle, not predominantly fat when you're talking about strength sports. So you've got the weightlifters and the power lifters. Again, the super heavies are not good examples of this because they tend to have extra fat. But if you think about these lighter weight class lifters, some of the people that come that I think of off the top of my head would be people like Pyros Demas, who was a Greek weightlifter who had an amazing physique. I don't know what weight class he competed in, but he was definitely in one of the lighter weight classes. He wasn't super heavyweight, and he was absolutely shredded. Looked like he was chiseled from granite. You had, I'm going to butcher his name here, but they called him the Pocket Hercules. His name was, I think it's pronounced Naim Suleymanoglu. He was a Bulgarian weightlifter. I think he competed in weight classes everywhere from, I think, 56 kilos up to about 62 kilos. So right around that 132 pounds, give or take, weight class. So he was a very light lifter, but every single pound of the guy was muscle. I mean, you can Google pictures of these guys from when they're, on stage in competition lifting weights, and they are absolutely shredded. One of my favorite lifters is Alexander Kucher, who I think he was a 75 kilo weightlifter, totaled around 2,200 pounds. I think it was like 2170 or 2172 or something like that. At 165 pounds body weight, 65 kilo weight class, the guy deadlifted 360 kilos. That's 794 pounds. And the guy's absolutely shredded. He's one of my favorite power lifters of all time, and that deadlift was freaking amazing. But the guy's got very low body fat, incredibly dense muscle. It's just awesome. And even some of the heavier lifters, if you look at like some of the, Kurt Karwoski, who is arguably one of the greatest power lifters in the history of the sport, was incredibly muscular, competing, I think, mostly in the 242 to 275 weight classes were where he put up his best numbers, if I'm not mistaken. And the guy was absolutely jacked and shredded for a power lifter. Some other people, I don't remember what year it was, but I think it might have been like 2005 or 2006, somewhere around there. I'm pretty sure it was 2005. I was at the Wake Forest Strength Coaches Clinic, which was hosted by Ethan Reeve, who is the head strength coach at Wake Forest. Fantastic strength coach, one of the greatest in the industry, in my opinion. And he had as one of the presenters at the clinic, weightlifting coach named Gail Hatch. And Gail had brought up one of his lifters, young lifter named Matt Bruce, I think his name was, and I think Matt lifted somewhere in that 165 to 167 weight class. I don't know what they are for weightlifting, but I think he was down just around 170 or under, so he wasn't a very big guy, but he was moving some big weights that day. He did a workout while Gail talked to us, and Matt, again, incredibly muscular with pretty low levels of body fat. And another great example would be my friend Mike Mahler. Mike is not a competitive lifter, but he is a strong guy. He's got a deadlift up in the mid fives. I know for a fact, based on his training logs, the guy doesn't do a lot of high reps in his training. He favors low reps, heavy weights. And if you've ever seen Mike, he's right around 185, 190 pounds. He's incredibly lean and muscular. He follows a pretty clean, or very clean, very Spartan clean vegan diet. So another guy who's totally plant-based, who's built a tremendous amount of muscle and a tremendous amount of strength, lifting heavy weights for low reps. So Mike's a great example of a non-competitive athlete who has an amazing physique from this heavy weight, low rep lifting protocol. So you can't, one of these arguments, people are always going to say, well, bodybuilders always look better, and there's bodybuilders who lift, they do the pump and burn type workouts, light weights, higher reps, yada, yada, yada. But think about this. Don't compare the bodybuilders who are contest ready, okay? Don't talk about the bodybuilders who are going through prep, because they're doing things like water depletion, sodium manipulation, depletion and loading, to help dry out. They're doing all these tricks and they're doing all these things to present the best overall package on stage. That's what the sport's all about. They tan, they use fake tan, they use different types of posing oils and stuff like that to bring out more definition under the lights on stage. Bodybuilding is part illusion when it comes time to stepping on stage. So they're doing things that they're not normally doing year round. Look at them when they're not in competition shape, just how they normally walk around, and I guarantee that you're going to find the bodybuilders who follow a heavier weight, lower rep protocol most of the time are going to have a little bit more dense physiques. I can think of an NPC bodybuilder that I worked with, a guy named Reggie, who's a great trainer here in Atlanta. He came to me to specifically start working on powerlifting technique, and as he started training the squat, bench, and deadlift much heavier, in 6 months, his physique was way more dense than it had ever been. My friend and teammate Giacomo Marchesi is, I know for a fact the guy lifts heavy. He did it here at my gym when he was down here for Veg Fest last year. Giacomo's another very strong, very well-developed vegan. And the guy lifts predominantly heavy weights. Even during prep, the guy's lifting as heavy as he can, and I know he's even hit some PRs through some of his more recent training cycles while he's getting ready for competitions. So he even lifts heavy year round, and he's got an amazingly dense and muscular physique as a result. So having this tone look, I guess if we kind of recap this episode and what we talked about today, remember, real tone it's a residual tension and a relaxed muscle. Okay, so in order to develop tone, we need to focus on strength training protocols that produce high amounts of tension. So your best lifts are going to be the compound lifts done very heavy. And when I say very heavy, I'm talking about if you know what your 1 repetition maximum is, or about what your an estimated 1 rep max is. We want to be probably somewhere in the 80 to 85% range most of the time. And sometimes you've got to get up close to 90-95%. Sometimes it's a good idea to focus on near maximal weights at least part of the time. So like if we're going to spend maybe 80% of the training year in that 75 to 80-85% range, focusing a little bit more on volume, 20% of the time we're going to need to creep up to 90-95%, maybe test a max or do a competition or something like that to raise strength levels, and also just to expose yourself to those higher loads, which are more neurologically demanding. It's an incredibly coordinated effort between the entire body via the nervous system when you're lifting a near maximal or maximal weight. So it's really important to expose yourself to those weights at least part of the time. As far as just general training recommendations, if you don't know where to start, a great place to start is simply 3 to 5 sets for 3 to 5 reps on your basic compound lifts. These would be things like high tension strength exercises, would be squats, would be bench presses, would be deadlifts, would be barbell rows, pull-ups, standing overhead presses, things like that allow you to get really, really tense in order to lift the heavier weights. There's plenty of programs out there that take a simple approach to building strength. Mark Riccato's Starting Strength, Jim Wendler's 5-3-1 program is probably the most famous, and it's just basic strength programming where he programs your 4 primary exercises: the squat, the bench press, the deadlift, and the standing overhead press. And his protocol utilizes about 3 working sets, typically in the 1 to 5 rep range. Sometimes he makes room for maybe repping out, particularly in early phases when he's got you starting too light, as he calls it. But if you look at the commonalities between that and then some of the recommendations by Pavel in his book, that 5 rep set seems to be where a lot of the magic happens, because when you're doing 3 to 5 working sets of 3 to 5 reps, you're going to be, especially if you keep about 1 or 2 reps in the bank, like a lot of people recommend, you're going to be right in that 80% range, give or take 5%. So the bulk of your training time should be spent with heavy weights in that 80 to 85% range, or 75 to 85% range, because it's going to allow the display of really good technique, because you're not working to a point of extreme fatigue like you would maybe going for a 1 rep max, where you might be more likely that your technique would break down. So you're going to be able to keep really, really good technique, and you're going to be able to keep your volume, somewhere in that. If we look at 3 to 5 sets of 3 to 5 reps, we're talking about 9 to 25 total total number of lifts in that kind of working range. So that's a pretty big swing in the volume there. But if you've ever done a 5x5 program, 25 working reps is a lot. But by doing them in 5 sets of 5, where you're in that, again, 75 to 85% range, you're typically not working to complete muscular fatigue, but you're handling relatively heavy weights. And that is the best way to condition the nervous system for what we're looking for is tone. The other thing is making sure that your body fat is low enough to see muscle definition. You can't have, you can't be, for a guy, 20% body fat and lift heavy and expect to see muscle definition. It's just not going to happen. You've got to get your body fat down. So diet is really, really important. Eating clean. I'm not saying you've got to go on a bodybuilder, diet where you got to cut out a major macronutrient or something like that. But just by eating clean, cleaning up the diet, and training consistently, you'll be able to get your body fat down to lower levels, and you should have relatively good muscle definition without having to do a lot of this pump and burn training. So again, I'm not bashing high rep lifting. I think there's a place for it, particularly in accessory work for various muscle groups, or if you're going to maybe work a little bit of isolation exercise. I don't see anything wrong with doing higher reps and maybe some extensions or some curls or something like that. But even on some of those isolation exercises, don't be afraid to push it heavy in that 4 to 6 rep range, and use some heavier weights occasionally if you're trying to bring a little more strength into those muscles, like the biceps, the triceps, calves, some of the smaller muscle groups. I know that this conversation could spiral into a little bit more of talking about fast twitch muscle fiber, slow twitch muscle fiber, having a predominance of one or the other, how that affects training, and all that crap. But I just, without getting that deep into it, if we just look at what tone is, again, a residual tension. Tone is residual tension in a relaxed muscle. And how we achieve that is through conditioning the nervous system, through high tension strength training. So it's that simple. You're not going to get tone by doing aerobics, doing pump and burn, low weight, high rep exercises. You're going to get it by lifting heavy, by training frequently, and by having low body fat. So that is the only real way to get toned. Again, so hopefully you found this episode interesting. It's just this whole concept of tone is something that I've been doing this for about 17, 18 years now, and I got to say probably 80 to 90% of the fitness assessments, the fitness consultations that I've done when I meet with a new client, the first thing out of their mouth is, well, I want to tone up. We always have to get more specific than that, but tone, again, being such a general and such a generic term, generally means low body fat and well-defined muscles. And really the best way to get there, again, let's repeat it one more time, through high tension strength efforts. So lift heavy, lift with good technique, lift safely, and get your body fat low, and you'll have all the tone that you're looking for. So again, that's going to wrap up this episode. I really hope you liked this week's episode. If you've got any suggestions for future topics, go ahead and leave them down in the comments below this video. Again, I'm still trying to pump out one of these a week. I got some good news for those of you who are fans of the Eat Plants Lift Iron book, or the work that I did with Stickman from Dead Prez. I talked to Stick a few days ago, and he's on board with getting up here and doing a episode for Strength and Health TV. So we're going to recap the Eat Plants Lift Iron book that we did. We're going to get a little bit more into that entire project and his goal to gain 20 pounds of muscle on a completely 100% whole food plant-based diet. If you caught my episode where I was on the Live Life Aggressively podcast with Mike Mahler and Sincere Hogan from earlier this year, we had talked a little bit about that, got into that a little bit more deeply, and I've gotten a lot of comments, a lot of feedback now that the book's been out and been selling. There's a lot of interest in it, so this episode's going to be really cool when I can get him up here to talk about it. For those of you who don't know what it's all about, just Google Eat Plants Lift Iron. I'll also put a link in the comments or the notes down below, so you can go check out the book if you haven't seen it yet. But basically, it's Stickman from Dead Prez, his wife Afia, and myself, how we all work together to help him accomplish his goal of gaining 20 pounds on a 100% whole food, plant-based diet. No supplements, no pills, no powders, just real food and heavy weightlifting. A lot of work in the 3 to 5 sets, 3 to 5 reps, except for that German volume training stuff. Want to know more about it? Guess you'll have to read the book or wait for the next episode. So signing off, thanks so much for checking this out. Hope you enjoyed it. See you next week. Take care. Stay strong and stay healthy.